Now this one has a couple extra things that you gotta be aware of. There's a bolt that goes through this timing cover, and then there's this brace here that we gotta get off. Those are both 13 mils.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me.
You don't lose it. Got a little piece here. Get this front one off too. Next, I'm gonna crack loose these head bolts while I'm here.
Give it a little tappy, tap, tap, taparoo.
I'm just cracking them loose with the ratchet. These are a 10 mil. Okay, then we're gonna get our valve cover off. Notice I haven't bothered to take the coil packs out. Don't really need to. Sometimes these are stuck on here pretty good. Especially when an engine gets cooked. We're gonna have to crack the rocker arms loose. You want to do a staggered release on these so you don't bend the shafts. Pressure off a little bit at a time. And one other thing I'm gonna do before I forget is this oil dipstick tube. It should be a 10 mil. Ooh, she's a little stinky. You can smell the burnt oil. Remember, these Hemi engines have different size push rods, different lengths I should say. The intakes are short, exhausts are long.
Can tell them apart.
We're going to inspect all this later because we're probably going to reuse some of this. On the head bolts, we're going to crack them loose in a spiral pattern. Good. Okay, remember our small bolts here. Now I expect to get a little bit of coolant once you pop these heads off.
Coolant leak! Rick, you got a coolant leak!
Yeah, that's a lot still in that side of the block. Oh yeah. That's one of the reasons I've got the wood here. It helps absorb all that. That's why we're taking it apart out here and not in the garage. Set that aside for now. Head gasket out of the way. We'll carry on. One thing I am doing is I'm bagging all the hardware. I know just by looking at these are the timing cover bolts, water pump bolts. But if this is your first time taking one of these apart, I highly suggest you label everything. Our lifters. There you go. Passenger front, cylinders 2 and 4. This isn't absolutely critical because this is a rollarized engine, so the wear patterns aren't quite as critical as a flat tappet cam. However, if I find any damage or anything like that, I want to go back and be able to reference what I was looking at. And it's always best if we can kind of keep things matched up anyway. So if we can keep the lifters matched up to the cam, great. We're going to do that.
Write that down. I don't have a pencil. I'll remember that then.
One of the things I do, when you go to put these heads back on, you want to make sure you're properly prepped. So when the bolt goes in, you want to make sure it's going to thread in properly, and there's nothing that's going to keep it from threading in. And a lot of times when you pull this out, there's going to be coolant or oil in the holes. And what happens is when you actually run this bolt down, they should all run down by hand when you put these in. When you got the head on there, it should go right to the head, right by hand. Just grab the socket, crank it in. If it doesn't, take it out, clean it out some more. But if there's oil or antifreeze in there, and you run the bolt in and you torque it, well, there's one of two things going to happen. Number one, you're going to compress that fluid and possibly crack your block. Very bad. Number two, you're not going to get an accurate torque on that bolt. So we don't want either of those scenarios. So what I do is I take my compressed air, hopefully you can see it, and I create the venturi to blow the air out. What I'm doing is I'm creating a low pressure area so it pulls the fluid out. think I just got my camera really good, but you get the idea. And I'll do that in the vehicle or with it out on the stand here. And I'll go through and do each one of those holes. Good way to clean them out. And if it's still not cleaned out, just run the bolt in, take it out, run it in, take it out a few times. It'll get that oil out of there. Before you go and put any of these lifters in when you're inspecting them, check how the roller rolls, see if there's any damage to the surface, and then also check to make sure it's not collapsed. I found a few of these that have collapsed, and that can cause problems as well. And when you're installing these, you want kind of this arch to go down. If this was a MDS engine, it's far more critical because these will have, actually I'll show you. So you look at here, you can see that says MDS rear. So that would go back here. And that's because I showed you the lifters are a little bit different depending on if they're MDS or non-MDS. And so the pockets are a different size. Anyways, let's keep going getting this together. These are an 8mm. All right, time for the next word of caution, head gaskets. The less expensive ones, they're not labeled, and this can cause a problem. So I'm gonna show you what to look out for when you're putting these on, because they only go on one way. Okay, let's have a look at our block. The dead giveaway is at the bottom here, these two holes, and this single hole here. You'll notice the block, we got two at the back, one at the front. And the second thing is right here, the way these are pointed. So this is the correct orientation for this gasket. This is the side it should go on. I'm going to show you how easy this is to mess up if we were to put this on the other side. So we have the gasket on the wrong side. How many of you can point out where the problem is right away? Now, at first glance, it looks okay, especially when we start back here. That's lined up, that's lined up. These are correct. That's all lined up, lined up, lined up, lined up. Uh-oh, right there. Look at that. You got a problem. You're going to have a big leak. That is the bolt hole. That's the coolant passage right there. So you're going to have some head gasket leak going on here. So it's very easy to mess these up. Just be aware of that and pay very close attention. We have the correct gasket on the correct side. Everything's lined up. We don't have that gap here. We've got the single hole, dual holes back here. All these are lined up. I've just cleaned up the surface with some brake clean. And now we can set our head on here. So let's go ahead and do that. Checking the surface of the head, make sure it's all nice and clean. There we go. This is reusable. You don't deform it. To be clear, you should inspect these bolts to make sure that they are in good condition. Make sure they're straight, they're not stretched, but they should be in good shape and you can reuse them. Now you'll recall me saying you should be able to thread this bolt all the way down by hand. And if you can't, there, I can feel it actually sucking the head on to the block. It is perfectly seated. If you can't, then you're gonna have to take that out and clean the hole again. Same thing with this bottom one. Now these don't have any thread sealer on them or anything like that, so you're good to go. So I can feel that that's nicely bottomed out. Top one's nicely bottomed out. We've got these perfectly flat. So when you do these, you're going to do it in a spiral pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the first step is 25 foot-pounds. Second step is 40 foot-pounds. And then the third step is 90 degrees. So that's the torque to angle part. We'll get into that. I'll show you in greater detail in a few minutes. Okay, let me get to putting the rest of these bolts in, and we'll talk about these top ones as well. Now you'll recall me saying on some of these you might not get all the fluid out. And just to back the bolt out, there you can see how wet those threads are. Believe it or not, you just clean that off. We can run that in there again. This time it'll probably bottom out, no problem. Now you might have to do that a couple times, but let's see what we got this time around. There we go, we just bonded it out on the head, no problem. But I'm going to take it out one more time, run it back in, make sure all that oil is out of there. Not as wet as it was before, so. Set up to 25 foot-pounds, let's get the initial torque done. Now that we get the first torque done, the 25 foot-pounds on the main bolts, into these top ones, we're going to do them at 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds. And you'll see that I went back and forth on those ones. Now we're set up to do our 40 foot-pounds, so here we go. This time we're doing 15 foot-pounds or 180 inch-pounds. Okay, now this is where I do something a little bit different. I've got these two guys. You can use whatever you want, a Sharpie or a paint pen, but I'm going to clean off the head of these bolts. I'm going to put a vertical line on them. Clean that in a second. Here you can see I've got the vertical lines on all the bolts. Top ones I did with paint pen, bottom ones I did with the silver Sharpie. Not a big difference. Now, this is the 90-degree torque. I've got this guy right here, which is fantastic. There's a reason I have this. Now you can use something like that, but there's a reason I have something like this. Much better. However, if you're really stuck, this line will get you to the same place, and I'll show you how. And I still mark everything anyways. Following the same pattern, okay, we're at 0. I've got a slight load on it, but I'm also got, now in the vehicle you won't be able to do this, but here we can. We can take this, and there's our 90-degree point. You can see that our line is now horizontal rather than vertical. But that's a good way to check and keep an eye on yourself. Let's talk about why I still do the line, especially when you're in the vehicle. You're not going to always be able to get a full 90-degree rotation on your torque wrench. So we're going to set this to 0. And let's say, oh, we made it 60 degrees. And then I hit the firewall or something. I can't torque it past that. So I'm gonna back up. I'm gonna uh-oh, 79 degrees. I haven't even put any torque on this. But I'm gonna keep a load on it, zeroed it again. I know I got 30 degrees to go. There we go. We check our mark. It confirms that we've got 90-degree rotation. Last reason we mark these is it's a good visual confirmation that we have got all the bolts torqued. You can see all the lines went from vertical to horizontal. We know for a fact we've torqued every one of them. So we'll move on. Now we're going to do a final torque on these top ones of 25 foot-pounds. And then this cylinder head is on. The things you want to look at is you want to look at the valve stems at the ends, and you want to see if they're all pitted, because that's signs that it's been valve hammering. And you also check your rocker arms for the same thing. These ones look good. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our push rods back in. And remember, there's two different lengths, one for the intake, one for the exhaust. You want to inspect them very carefully. So I've come across ones like that. Look at how worn this one is right here. Okay, that ball is worn out. I've seen them way worse than that. I've seen them pinched closed that they're so worn down. That is, that's toast. That didn't come off of this engine. That's just one that I've had kicking around. There's a brand new push rod compared to the old one. So we're not going to reuse this push rod. We're going to get rid of that, replace it. So keep a close eye on these and look for some wear. If you're wondering which rod goes where, these shorter ones, the intakes, go deeper in the head. See, there's a pocket down in there. Make sure you get it in the right spot. It's easy to miss that. We'll talk about when we put the rockers on too. And the longer ones, they go in the hole that's a little higher up. You should be able to feel the lifter get pushed down when you put that in. You're looking at these, you want to check for valve hammering. I want to see some pitting right there. So that's not really good. That one's fine. You can see that one's good. It's nice and shiny and it's clean still. But that one's all pitted up, so that's been valve hammering. The other thing you want to do is you want to check these pockets. Like I showed you on the push rod, they can wear, and these pockets will dig out too. So if you have any of that pitting or that pocket is dug out, then replace that rocker. Rockers on. Now, one thing you gotta be careful of, especially in the vehicle, is these suckers are so hard to tell if they're in the cup. And it's a lot nicer on the stand here because we're kind of going straight down, but look, this one popped out again already. So you gotta be very careful that when you're doing this in the vehicle. It's a lot easier to look at it here. And often you'll get these engines together and you'll have a problem, you'll have a miss. And what's happened is you missed getting the push rod in the rocker. And the other thing you want to do is you want to walk these down. You don't want to just get on it and crank this middle one down because you can bow this shaft. If you do that, you're gonna have some issues. So we're gonna put that down a bit, then there. We'll kind of walk back and forth as we go. So what I like to do, put my finger here, give this a wiggle, make sure the rod moves with the cup. That one's already got some tension on it, but it's in. That one's good. That one's out. That full turn, still in. Just double check these constantly. Okay, starting to get some tension. It's in. Okay. Go back to the middle. A little more tension on that. Just keep repeating this until you bottom them all out, and then you can get your torque value on them. And these are torqued to 16 foot-pounds. So what is that? We got an inch-pound wrench here. So 160 plus 32, 192. We'll go 195. Okay, then I'm going to get the exhaust shaft on, and then I'm going to rotate the engine through a couple times to make sure this is all good, make sure every one of these moves, and then I'm going to retorque it, and then I'll put the valve cover on. When you torque this, these are torqued to 17 foot-pounds or about 205 inch-pounds, but you're going to start again in the middle, do a spiral pattern out, and you're going to want to go over this a few times. That's the tip, because I'll show you why. You're going to need a 10 mil and a 13 mil. So I already torqued these top two, but let's see what happens when I put the wrench back on them. Starting with this one. Look at that. Okay, and you want to go through it until, look at how much that one moved. Quite a bit. So you want to keep going through this until these don't move anymore. It looks like we're pretty much there now. I went through this a few times just to make sure they were all at their proper torque. Good. Okay, that one's good. We can put our heat shield back on. All right, there we go. We've got it back together. The heads are on, the cam's in there, and we got the good lifters and push rods. We've checked the rotating assembly. Everything's good.